The air doesn't just smell, it suffocates. A cloying, oily rot that clings to the tongue and coats the lungs in the scent of a dying civilization. It wasn't just a camp, it was a factory for ghosts. How did the world's most civilized empire build a billion-mark machine so efficient it turned 60,000 humans into skeletons? While the guards kept their golden hair in perfect porcelain curls? Why did the architects of the future end up ruling over a kingdom of literal rot? But that was a lie. History focuses on the scale of the dead, but it misses the chilling normalcy of the living. The generals missed the warning because it came from a woman they treated as a ledger, entry, an invisible girl with nothing but a jagged piece of mirror and a memory like steel. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. April 15th, 1945, Lower Saxony. The German spring is in its first cruel bloom. The air should smell of pine needles and damp earth, the scent of a continent finally beginning to breathe after 6 years of suffocation. But as the tanks of the British 11th Armored Division grind across the heath, the atmosphere thickens. It becomes heavy, cloying. It is a sweet, oily rot that clings to the wool of their uniforms and sticks to the back of their throats. The soldiers, battle-hardened men who have spent years stepping over the debris of broken cities, find themselves instinctively reaching for their handkerchiefs, as if they could wipe away the smell of a collapsing civilization. They are used to the smell of cordite and diesel. They are not used to this. They expect a routine surrender. A local truce has been negotiated to prevent the spread of typhus, a practical military arrangement. The British believe they are entering a detention facility. In their minds, they are prepared for the logistics of war, gates, guards, perhaps a few thousand disgruntled prisoners of war who need a hot meal and a letter home. Instead, the world stops. The gates of Bergen-Belsen swing open, and the silence that rushes out is more deafening than any artillery barrage. There are no cheers. There is no movement. There is only a landscape of gray earth, gray sky, and thousands of gray figures who look less like people and more like weathered carvings of bone. 60,000 human beings are packed into a space designed for a fraction of that number. They are so still that the soldiers cannot tell the living from the dead until a hand, a claw of skin and sinew, twitches in the dirt. It is a mass of humanity reduced to its most primal, desperate state, where the act of breathing is the only remaining form of rebellion. Standing at the center of this moral collapse is the system. The SS guards move through the chaos with a terrifying clinical detachment. They are well fed. Their uniforms are pressed to a razor's edge. Among them are young women, some barely in their 20s, with hair neatly pinned and boots polished to a mirror shine. To a casual observer, they look like sisters or daughters from any village in Europe. This is the first great irony the liberators face, that evil does not always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes it wears a summer dress and a smile. The fatal flaw of Bergen-Belsen wasn't just a lack of mercy, it was a mechanical failure of the state. By 1945, the Nazi logistics chain had become a black box of death. As the Red Army squeezed from the east, the Greater Reich began to vomit its secrets westward. Belsen became the dumping ground. The mechanic of disaster was simple. Input 10 times the intended population into a closed loop with zero resources. Think of it like a clogged drain in a massive industrial sink. When the water stops flowing, the filth backs up until the entire system overflows. In Belsen, the pipes were the barracks, and the filth was the deliberate neglect of human biology. The infrastructure didn't just break. It was never intended to survive the volume of the dying. The result was a feedback loop of typhus and starvation that turned a camp into a biological weapon aimed squarely at the undesirables trapped within. The SS Commandant, Joseph Kramer, meets the British officers at the gate. He does not hide. He does not flee. He clicks his heels with a sickeningly familiar military precision. He offers a tour as if he were showing off a well-run factory to a group of visiting investors. He is the personification of the forensic killer. He believes that because he followed the paperwork, because he maintained the protocol and respected the chain of command, he is beyond reproach. In his mind, he isn't a murderer. He's an administrator dealing with a supply chain issue. The camp is in good order, he seems to suggest through his posture, considering the circumstances. But while Kramer stands there, basking in the arrogance of his rank, the ghost in the machine is already beginning to haunt him. In the shadows of the barracks, away from the polished boots of the SS, a survivor, a woman whose name the world will soon know as Hanka, watches the tanks. She does not move. She does not cry. She simply holds a small, jagged piece of mirror she has hidden for months. She is the quiet competence that has outlasted the loud panic of the Reich. She is the witness that the system forgot to delete. The British soldiers are not administrators. They are men. And as they look past Kramer's polished buttons, they see the true cost of his order. They see the pits. They see the piles of corpses that the SS had stopped burying because the math of death had finally outpaced the speed of the shovel. Kramer scoffs at the British officer's visible horror. He believes the rules of war will protect him. He treats the arrival of the British as a bureaucratic transfer of power, a simple handoff of keys between professionals. He treats the mounds of the dead as a logistical inconvenience that the British will now have to manage, but he has fatally underestimated the human spirit. He believes that because he has stripped these people of their clothes, their hair, and their names, he has stripped them of their power. He treats the stillness of the camp as submission. It isn't submission. It is a coiled spring. The British 11th Armored didn't just find a camp. They found a mirror reflecting the absolute abyss of human nature. They are here to save, but they quickly realize a bitter truth. Their very presence might kill. If they give a starving man a full ration of soldiers' food, his body will reject it so violently it will stop his heart. Every solution they try creates a new, agonizing problem. The system has designed a trap so perfect that even the rescuers are forced to become part of the tragedy. Kramer stands there, confident in his manual of rules. He believes the law is on his side because he was only following orders. He does not see the hammer of justice that is already mid-swing. The silence of the graves is about to be broken by a roar of indignation that will echo through history. But for now, the soldiers can only stand in the mud, paralyzed by a truth they were never prepared to witness. The laughter of the SS guards, who joked about the Kaffir skeletons only hours ago, is about to hit a wall of cold British steel. 5 months have passed since the gates were torn open, but the stench of Bergen-Belsen still clings to the soul of every man who walked those grounds. The world has moved on to the business of rebuilding. But for the survivors, the war hasn't ended. It has simply moved into a room. September 17th, 1945. Lüneburg, Germany. The setting is a makeshift courtroom inside a converted gymnasium. It is a place built for sport and youth, now repurposed to weigh the weight of human depravity. The wood floors, once scuffed by the shoes of athletes, now creak under the weight of the Belsen trial, the first of its kind, a precursor to the Grand Theater of Nuremberg. In the dock sit 45 men and women. They are the system in the flesh. They no longer wear the death's head insignia. They wear numbers pinned to their chests like specimens in a laboratory. At the center sits Irma Grese. At only 21 years old, she is the youngest defendant and the most terrifying. The press calls her the beautiful beast. She sits with her back perfectly straight, her golden hair styled with a precision that seems like a final, defiant act of vanity. She does not look like a monster. She looks like a porcelain doll. But when the survivors enter the room, they do not see a girl. They see the woman who walked the camp with a silver-studded whip and 2 starving Great Danes. The defense is a masterpiece of military logic. The lawyers, representing the fallen Reich, lean on a single immovable pillar, the fatal flaw of individual responsibility. They argue that in a total war, the person is merely a gear in a machine. If the machine is programmed for destruction, the gear cannot be blamed for the friction. One defense counselor stands, his voice echoing in the rafters of the gym. A soldier, he declares, does not question the nature of the ditch he is told to dig. He only ensures it is the correct depth. My clients were not architects. They were the shovels. This is the crystallized arrogance of the era. They believe that by hiding behind the manual, they can escape the blood on their hands. They treat the slaughter of thousands as a strategic necessity that was unfortunately managed poorly. But they have fatally underestimated the ghosts in the machine. While the lawyers argue over the mechanics of command, the survivors sit in the gallery waiting. They are no longer the gray shadows of April. They have names again. They have voices. And they have memories that no military manual can erase. Among them is a young woman who refuses to look away from Grace's icy stare. Let us call her Elena. In the camp, Elena was invisible, a shadow, who survived by cleaning the guards' quarters. She saw the mechanism of death from the inside. She saw how Grese would spend hours choosing which silk dress to wear before heading to the gas chambers, a moment of beauty before a day of butchery. The prosecution calls the first witness. The room falls into a heavy, suffocating silence. The black box of the camp's daily life is about to be opened. The legal mechanic of the trial hinges on proving that these guards didn't just follow orders. They enjoyed them. The mechanism of failure in the defense's logic is simple. Orders can command a hand to pull a trigger, but they cannot command a heart to take pleasure in the scream. As Elena takes the stand, a defense attorney scoffs. He looks at her frail frame and her trembling hands. To him, she is a substandard witness, a victim whose trauma has surely clouded her objective memory. He believes the official records, the tidy typed lists of the SS will always outweigh the emotional noise of a survivor. But he has missed the cognitive bridge because the survivors were outsiders, because they were the ones the system tried to delete. They saw the patterns the experts missed. They remember the exact time of day the water was turned off. They remember the specific click of the lock that signaled a night of terror. While the SS saw management, the survivors saw murder. The attorney leans in, his voice dripping with a condescending pity. You claim the defendant Grese struck you on the morning of March 12th, but the camp logs show she was on administrative duty in the kitchen. How can you be so sure of a date when you didn't even have a watch? Elena looks at him. The trembling stops. I didn't need a watch, she whispers. I had the sun, and I had the bruise that stayed for 3 weeks. The logs tell you where her body was, but the whip tells me where her soul was. In that moment, the hero confronts the representative of the system. The lawyer's face flushes. He has no rebuttal for the physics of pain. The audience in the courtroom leans forward, the curiosity gap closing as they realize the manual is a lie. The trial moves with a brutal, forensic pace. Each testimony is a hammer blow against the cradle of arrogance. The guards begin to realize that the military code they relied on is a hollow shield. They believed the silence of their victims was permanent. They treated the dead as data points that would never talk back. But the silence wasn't surrender. It was a reservoir of truth, waiting for the right moment to break the dam. As the weeks grind on, the beautiful beast begins to crack. The composure slips. She starts to tap her fingers on the wood of the dock, a frantic, rhythmic sound that mimics the heartbeat of the very people she once tormented. She realizes that the system she served has abandoned her. The generals are gone. The Führer is ash. She is left alone in a gymnasium, facing the eyes of the people she thought were nothing. The prosecution rests its case with a terrifying simplicity. They don't just show the photos of the pits. They show the photos of the guards smiling next to them. This is the fatal flaw of the Nazi psyche. They were so proud of their order that they documented their own descent into hell. The hubris is complete. The hammer is descending. The guards dismiss the warnings of the approaching allies, believing their master race status made them untouchable. They treated the laws of humanity as obsolete protocols. But the law respects no uniform. As the judge prepares to deliberate, a sense of inevitable doom fills the room. The defendants look at each other, seeing for the first time not comrades, but co-conspirators in a bankrupt enterprise. The world is watching, not for a happy ending, but for a reckoning. The victory will be bitter, for no sentence can bring back the 60,000. But the silence of the grave has finally been replaced by the roar of the truth. The December 13th, 1945. Hamelin Prison. The morning is a sheet of frozen glass, brittle and unforgiving. Inside the stone walls, a man named Albert Pierrepoint prepares his tools. He is not a soldier. He is not a judge. He is a British grocer by trade. But today, he is the final mechanic of a different sort of system. He works with a quiet, terrifying efficiency, checking the tension of the hemp ropes and the grease on the trapdoor hinges. For the 11 condemned guards of Bergen-Belsen, The protocol they once worshipped has finally turned its face toward them. The black box of justice is now a literal wooden box, a scaffold built with the same cold industrial logic that the SS once used to process their victims. The mechanism of death here is the long drop. It is a precise calculation of weight and distance designed to snap the second cervical vertebra instantly. If the rope is too short, the prisoner strangles. If it is too long, the result is a grisly decapitation. Pierre Point has calculated the math to the centimeter. He treats the execution not as an act of revenge, but as a forensic necessity, a cleaning of the ledger. The first to be brought out is Joseph Kramer, the Beast of Belsen. He walks to the gallows with a strange, rigid dignity. Even now, with the noose waiting, he clings to the crystallized arrogance of his rank. He looks at Pierre Point as if the executioner were a subordinate failing to follow a proper manual. He believes that by dying well, he can somehow validate the system he served. But history is a cruel editor. As the hood is placed over his head, the villain's voice within him is finally silenced. He believed he was an architect of a new world order. He dies as a number on a British hanging list. The hammer falls with a dull, heavy thud, and the man who oversaw the starvation of thousands is reclaimed by the gravity he tried to defy. Then comes Irma Grese. She is 22 years old. She walks to the scaffold with the same defiant porcelain stare that chilled the hearts of the survivors in Lüneburg. She does not repent. She does not beg. She looks at the rope and whispers a single word: Schnell. Faster. It is the final irony. The woman who made a career of prolonging the agony of others is the one who demands the mercy of a quick end. She treats her own death as a scheduled appointment, but as the trapdoor swings open, the beautiful beast is reduced to a statistic. The bitter aftertaste of this victory is the realization that her death, though just, is a microscopic payment for the mountain of debt she left behind. While the gallows in Hamelin are working their way through the list, another fire is being lit. Back at the site of the camp, the British Army has made a decision. The barracks, the wooden barns where the typhus and the rot had lived for years, cannot be saved. They are too saturated with the fatal flaw of the Nazi experiment. They are a biohazard to the living and a stain on the earth. Flamethrowers are brought forward. The soldiers watch as the orange tongues of fire lick the gray wood. The system is literally being turned to ash. As the smoke rises into the German sky, there is a moment of cognitive bridge. The soldiers realize that the camp wasn't just a place, it was a mindset. You can burn the wood and you can hang the guards, but you cannot incinerate the question that remains. How did ordinary people, the grocers, the secretaries, the daughters, make these unforgivable choices? We often tell ourselves that the SS were monsters born of another planet. We treat them as anomalies. But that is the most dangerous lie of all. The mechanism of failure in Belsen wasn't a lack of humanity. It was the slow, steady surrender of the individual to the massive system. It was the belief that as long as the paperwork was correct, the morality didn't matter. The hubris and the hammer still echoes today. We see it every time a bureaucracy prioritizes the protocol over the person. We see it whenever someone claims they are only following the data while ignoring the suffering in front of them. The boss is no longer the SS. It is the cold, unfeeling efficiency of our modern structures. Do we see this same hubris in our society today? Have we built new black boxes where we hide the consequences of our choices? The Bergen-Belsen trial was a revolution because it stripped away the shield of orders. It told the world that the underdog, the victim, the witness has a voice that is louder than any general's command. It established that our primary duty is not to the state, but to the person standing next to us. As the final embers of the barracks fade into the cold German mud, the story of Belsen leaves us with a permanent scar. It is a reminder that the line between a civilized society and the abyss is thinner than a sheet of paper. It is held together only by the courage of the individual to say no when the system says yes. If you believe that stories like Elena's and the thousands who never got a name deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing. Your attention is the only thing that keeps these truths from being buried a second time. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.